Guys, so today we're going to analyze Denis Shapovalov's forehand and why it's subpar compared to Nadal's forehand. And as always, there is no disrespect intended towards these players. It's just pure technical analysis. So, right off the bat, what can we notice? We notice that Denis Shapovalov releases his non-dominant hand too early, which means he's not getting coiled enough to store maximum amounts of power.
So here's Carlos Alcaraz, one of the best forehands in tennis, and notice how long he keeps his left hand on the racket as he's preparing in his unit turn. All the way up until here, where his non-dominant hand is behind his hitting shoulder, so he's really holding on to the racket for a long time. And the purpose of this, as this comment correctly suggests, is to maintain stability so his racket isn't wobbling during the takeback. And two, by holding on to the racket for so long, he's super coiled, enabling him to store as much potential energy as possible, which he then unleashes into contact.
To see him release his racket maybe around here. If we look at Alcaraz doesn't release his non-dominant arm until racket hand gets to his racket shoulder. So right around here. And this was from a few years ago, so Denis Shapovalov has changed his forehand since then for the better. But if we notice, his racket goes way too high. I mean, look at that. Look at his hand. It's like half a foot above his head. It's just way too high. I mean, theoretically, one might think, oh, you can get way more power from gravity because the hand drops from a very high position. But there's a trade-off, right? The downside of having your hand this high is that you're wasting all this energy bringing your arm up so high, which is unnecessary. And the other thing is, as we saw from Alexander Zverev's forehand, having your hand go this high kind of goes hand in hand with a neutral wrist. So if we look at this from here to here, we can see that his wrist is quite neutral, right? And one of the key elements we want to get into as we're preparing that, for example, Federer, Djokovic, Alcaraz, Sinner get into is a cocked wrist. And if you don't have that cocked wrist, you're going to be missing out on some power and control. A cocked wrist helps with extending the pronator muscles, which will help for getting more power later. So he maintains this neutral wrist, and as a result, his forehand isn't as good as it could be. The other thing we can notice is that on this shot, Denis doesn't quite pet the dog before he starts his forward swing. See how the racket strings are somewhat open because we can see some of the strings are not pointing down towards the ground. Now this might just be because of this high shot, so we'll take a look at some other shots. Let's take a look at this one, for example. Okay, so this one he is petting the dog, but again, the neutral wrist is a huge killer. Musetti, Andy Murray, any player with a relatively weaker forehand, I'm saying weaker, obviously it's not weak, it's weaker compared to like Alcaraz or Djokovic tier, all right? Weak compared to the ideal. So here he does a good job petting the dog, and then he supinates into contact, but the big thing is look at his head. Denis Shapovalov's head is like a bobblehead. It never stays still. It always kind of pulls off towards the right. He doesn't look at contact. You don't have to look at contact, but his head is very unstable, which is causing his body to also kind of spin out of control. And in this shot, that he doesn't do a great job of pronating. So I can tell because right after contact, his strings are still, they're not starting to close. They're even slightly open there. At this point, they should already be much more closed. So sometimes he has pronation issues. Usually it's good, I think. The other thing I notice is his arm doesn't fully extend through contact. It doesn't have to fully extend, but he's not pushing his chest and shoulder forward through the shot. He's kind of just making contact and then his forearm is coming around this way. Whereas if you look at players with elite forehands, they really get this shoulder and chest like coming around way more. Shot, one thing we can notice is his pronation again isn't ideal, because look at from here to here how his racket doesn't continue to turn over and close. Like it's kind of just stays the same angle of openness instead of coming over more. So he's not pronating enough or early enough. Like right there he starts right there he's pronated well, but it's a little bit too late. And what that'll do is that'll prevent him from getting adequate control and cover on the shot. Now here's another one where it's kind of a classic Shapovalov look, where he just looks a little bit jammed. And the reason is because he's not letting his body and shoulders lead the shot. Instead, if you look, his arm is coming forward prematurely before his shoulders have come around. So I'm going to discuss this in other videos as well, but you want your arm actually to be close to in line with your shoulder to shoulder plane here. So if I draw a straight line, his arm should be further back here. You'll notice that with Alcaraz, with Djokovic, Nadal, they'll have their body more. And Shapovalov kind of leads more with his arm. Two other issues I wanted to point out, minor issues, but look at Denis's contact point on all of his forehands. We'll see a similar pattern. Notice how when he makes contact, his racket is always slightly down at an angle. So we'll just see that same pattern reoccur right there. His racket is always below his hand, which isn't optimal. If you look at in the world, they'll have their rackets pretty much parallel to ground level by the time they make contact. So I think this is also affecting Denis's consistency. Which is kind of related to his head, but someone commented that he jerks his body off to the right. So his body pulls off to the right too much. So again, we can see here that at the end of his backswing, see how his racket is ever so slightly drifting off behind his body here before he started swinging forward. So he's losing a little bit of potential energy. He's leaking it prematurely. Whereas if you look at Nadal and the other best forehands, they'll keep their racket on their dominant side up until they're really actually about to swing forward. So he's already losing a little bit of control and power here. Yeah, guys, those are the main things. He still has a great forehand, of course. That's why he's one of the best players in the world. But these are some of the things preventing him from, like, for example, winning a Grand Slam or being more consistent in his wins. So let me know what you guys thought, and hope you enjoyed the video. Thanks.